appreciate that. And again, I'll just reiterate, there is really nothing I enjoy more than really trying to help parents understand their rights and sometimes their responsibilities in special education programs to make sure that their children do get offered a free and appropriate public education. My work also does extend to working with the local educational agencies, your school divisions, special ed director department, and offering them technical assistance as well. And I want to emphasize that tonight, that what I'm doing tonight is providing you all with technical assistance. Anything that I say today should not be construed as being an indication that a school division is or may be out of compliance in regards to any of the specific questions, or for that matter, that they're in compliance. So do not take anything I say as a position of the Department of Education that a school division may be out of compliance, or for that matter, again, in compliance with special education laws and regulations. This is being provided to provide you with some insight as to where the department stands on the issues related to your questions, provide you with the technical associated with it, and provide some guidance on how you can move forward in resolving the issues that you're presenting. I think Lisa sent me over 30 questions total, and we've whittled it down to 25. What you're going to see is I've actually copied your questions to a PowerPoint slide, modified them slightly in some cases, but for the most part, they are the way that you presented them. I have not ad-libbed or changed anything in content. They are your questions. And again, certainly none of these are student-specific responses that you'll get from me tonight. So with that said, if Nikki, you can move to the next slide, I would appreciate it. I wanted to start a little bit to remind everybody that the most important component of a free, appropriate public education is the requirement children receive provided to a child with special needs must be appropriate for that child. And that hasn't changed since the COVID-19 epidemic took charge of our educational system here in the Commonwealth and across the country. FAPE is still based on the appropriateness of what that child needs in order to receive a full, free, and appropriate public education. It still must be individualized, but the one thing you have to remember as a parent is that FAPE is not going to look the same as it did prior to COVID in many instances. That's not to say that you shouldn't advocate for your child to get the same level of services, and that a school division should not be working with you to ensure they get the appropriate amount of services to meet their needs during this unprecedented time of school closure and going to virtual learning. So I just wanted to make that public service announcement about FAPE. It's all about the appropriateness of for the child. And I stress that bullet at the bottom that says FAPE must be individualized. Next slide, please. I want to also emphasize that the procedural safeguards outlined in the regulations governing special education programs for children with disabilities in Virginia, what I refer to as the Purple Book, at the VAC 20-81-170, which is the procedural safeguard sections, have not been suspended or modified in any way. And that means that all the things that are your parental rights and procedural safeguards remain in effect. Specifically, I want to stress about meeting participation, the receipt of prior written notices, and parental consent. None of that has been modified, changed, suspended, or otherwise usurped. And for that matter, the whole Purple Book remains in effect. Nothing in the Purple Book as whole has been modified, but I wanted to stress about the procedural safeguards, because when this thing first started, a lot of people were asking, what about prior written notice? What about consent? Has not changed. The same requirements for providing the prior written notice and receiving parental consent remain the same. Next slide. I also want to talk a little bit about the difference between a school being closed and a school being operational yet offering only virtual instruction or limited instruction in person or doing some kind of blended. When the COVID-19 pandemic initially kicked in, the governor closed schools. Schools could not take students, were not to provide any kind of instruction, they were closed. We quickly went into the virtual mode, and now that we are entered into phase 3, school divisions have been given the authority to reopen schools for in-person, virtual, or some form of blended instruction. How they choose to do that rests solely with them at the division level. As you know, as a Commonwealth, we at the department cannot direct that a school division operate in any specific way other than through the provision of our standards of quality, standards of accreditation, and the laws and regulations that impact on the operation of schools and the offering of special education. So it's not like we at the department could say to the school divisions, you all will open and provide a blended offer of instruction. So every school division is offering what they believe is best for their students, taking into consideration all of the guidance that's provided by the Center for Disease Control, the Virginia Department of Health, and information that they're receiving from other outlets with regard to opening in person or going virtual or in a blended fashion. So I may speak to a certain situation where it's about only virtual or only about in person, but keep in mind that your school division has the authority to operate when they open as they choose to be appropriate. The only thing that we have stressed is schools must be offering new instruction for the 2020-21 school year. So students should be working on new things, where during the COVID closures, most school divisions went to virtual learning and provided what we called continuing continuity of instruction. In other words, making sure students still had access to some kind of educational pursuits and may not necessarily have been afforded a full appropriate public education as was written in their IEP. But if the school was closed, technically closed, and offering only some continuity of instruction offerings, then they may or may not have violated the provision of FAPE. Again, each situation would have to be evaluated on each student's merit, on each school's offerings, and how they actually operated during the closure. Next slide. Okay, what I'm going to do is read the questions as they were presented to me and then offer my response. It says schools are offering parents the choice of in-person or virtual schooling. If parents elect the virtual schooling for a period of time, does that constitute a change in placement? If it is a change in placement, how do we get our children back into the original class once virtual learning is no longer necessary? And I'll add necessary, I'll add to that appropriate. And then maybe going back, the schools all open up and go to a all in-person offering come their spring semester. The difference, first thing you got to look at, there's a difference between a virtual school and then virtual instruction. There are schools out there that operate as a virtual school. Therefore, a virtual school could be deemed to be a change in placement, where virtual instruction would be considered a change in the delivery of service, as you would see on your service page, where you have to list the frequency, duration, and location. The location now may read, instead of a public day general ed classroom, it may say in a virtual environment or through virtual instruction. And again, each school division can determine how they word that in their IEP. So if a parent chooses to go virtual now at the beginning of the year for whatever reason, they're concerned with safety, or they think it's the best for their kid, they can go back and ask that the child be considered for what other options might be available within that school system, such as in-person instruction at any time. Now, some schools may say, nope, you chose the virtual learning for the first period, the first semester, excuse me. There still has to be a discussion, or should be a discussion, as an item of fate, because what we're saying is you don't agree now that the virtual learning is the most appropriate placement or most appropriate delivery of service for your child, and that becomes an issue of fate. And if you request an IEP meeting to go back, then an IEP meeting should be considered and offered as appropriate. Next question. All right. Will my child's IEP be paused due to virtual learning? Will social supports and academic supports be in place that were not in the spring? We felt very unsupported as we tried to navigate and support his needs at home. We plan to have him attend virtual school in the fall. Students with disabilities IEPs should be implemented as they are written or amended as we begin the new school year. So there's nothing about pausing. It doesn't stop. It doesn't go on hold. It doesn't go in reserve. The IEP that you're currently holding for your child that you last consented to should be implemented with the appropriate changes to meet the environment in which the child is going to be served. And that would include ensuring that they get social supports, academic supports. And if you put them in, as I said earlier, if you put them in virtual school now, you can always request that the child return to in-person or a blended situation later in the date. And remember, I said earlier when we were talking about FAPE and what's appropriate, when the schools were closed, most were not offering school. They were offering just continuity of instruction. So there's a little bit of difference, and those things would need to be discussed through the IEP team as well. And I'm going to talk about that when I get towards the end of some of the questions that speak directly to how do we fill in what my child didn't get during the COVID situation. Question number 3, please. How will kids receive services like occupational therapy, adapted PE, hearing itinerant services, speech therapy, etc. during the pandemic? That everything is an IEP team decision, but one of the ways that school divisions have been able to provide these types of services in many cases has been through the use of telehealth, doing services through virtual methods. But again, you would want to talk with your IEP team about what is appropriate and how your child will receive what that child needs in relation to other students. Again, remember I said, FAPE is still needing to be individualized during the time of the pandemic. Next question. How are IEPs going to be handled, and can we request them to be in person? I think what this question is getting to, are all IEPs going to have to be amended? Maybe, maybe not. But again, that depends on what type of situation the child's going to enter into. But school divisions and the parents should certainly be looking at the IEP to see if there is a need to address any specific changes. And yes, you can certainly request that an IEP meeting be done in person if you believe that a virtual meeting just does not give you the opportunity to fully and actively participate in the meeting. And again, keep in mind everything about the meeting scheduling still remains in effect as prior to pre-COVID. All right, next question. Would virtual school be a change of placement and therefore require an IEP to discuss goals, services, and placement for the virtual setting? Mentioned that earlier, that a virtual school could certainly be seen as a change in placement, But if we're really talking about virtual learning in the public school environment, then maybe not. However, there should be a discussion regarding goals, services, and how those things are going to be delivered through an IEP meeting as a full meeting, or as an IEP addendum with a meeting, or as an IEP addendum without a meeting with parental consent to do so. It's difficult to do this with not being able to say, am I answering that question? Is there any follow-on? But we'll continue to move forward as we are. Question number 6. How do we get services provided with an all virtual start to school? My daughter received none for 3 months during the shutdown. I'll answer the second part of that question later on, as I mentioned before. The service that will be provided to any child during an all virtual start need to be discussed with the child's IEP team. And I will say there is nothing that prohibits a school division that says we are going to have an all virtual start from having some students receiving all in-person and or even a blended mix of in-person and virtual learning if that's what the child may need. You got to keep in mind though, however, that the school division does have first and foremost in the back of their process, and as should you as a parent, the child's safety, the students, the staff safety, and the overall safety and health and well-being of the school environment. But the answer to the question is those services need to be discussed through the IEP team process, as I said, either as a whole meeting, an IEP addendum meeting, or an IEP addendum without a meeting. And again, making sure that the parent consents to the IEP addendum without the meeting process. Question 7. How will VDOE ensure that all aspects of the student's IEP are implemented with fidelity? One of the key roles of the department is to ensure the schools are implementing the laws and regulations of state and federal special education laws and regulations, and we'll continue to do that through the use of providing technical assistance to not only parents but the school divisions, but also by the use of our mediation, filing of a state complaint, or filing a due process dispute resolution options. Again, we are doing a lot of technical assistance. We're preparing a lot of frequently asked questions to try to address not only your questions, but the questions that are being asked of our school divisions. And believe it or not, some of the questions are similar in nature. And we hope that through that we will have a good start to the school year. But again, if parents feel that their IEPs are not being implemented with fidelity, they certainly can reach out to the VDOE, specifically to my office, and speak with myself, Tracy Lee, or Gloria Dalton about your concern. We can reach out and talk with our counterparts at the LEA. And then if it's a situation where it's just not being implemented and you've got documentation to show that it's not, then you could avail yourself to those dispute resolution options I mentioned earlier. Question 8. What kind of support will there be to families for whom an adult is not in a position to work with their child through a full school day for whatever reason? That's going to be a local decision as far as what kind of support you may be able to receive through the school or possibly through some other community-based assistance program. I'm not sure exactly what kind of support we're talking about, if it's about being able to have another adult come into the house so the child can receive virtual instruction. That's a personal decision on how you work that out. And this is one of the toughest questions that has been at the forefront of this whole situation is how do we make sure that parents have what they need in order to be able to help their child during the virtual learning, and what supports they need, whether it's technology or time or whatever. There may be a need to look at an alternate schedule for a child through the virtual mode. And keeping in mind, everything in the virtual schooling or distance learning does not have to be on a computer. There are alternate methods of providing distance learning or virtual learning. And those should be things that the parents should raise through their IEP team. This is what my needs are if we're going to go into this virtual mode and not have any in-person instruction, then these are the things I need and that my child's going to need in order to receive a free, appropriate public education. Question number 9. How will IEP goals for social skills be addressed? This again would have to be a decision and discussion with the IEP team. There's nothing that says that social skills can't be monitored from a distance depending on the type of situation that the child is in. But again, it's also going to depend on what the goal is, what type of social skills goals are being addressed that need to be assessed. And again, this is an IEP team discussion and determination. Question 10. How does VDOE plan to address local policies of discrimination against students with disabilities? And will VDOE intervene if local districts violate disability rights at a system-wide levels? I'm going to take the first part of that question and say that if it's a discrimination issue, the VDOE has no authority to investigate directly a discrimination complaint and would have to be referred to the Office for Civil Rights. That's not to say we're going to outrightly dismiss it. We would certainly inquire to the school division, try and get some background and provide some technical assistance and guidance based on laws and regulations that impact on special education for students. But as far as an actual discrimination complaint, that would have to go to the Office for Civil Rights, as I mentioned. And will we intervene if local districts violate disability rights at the system level? We would certainly, again, take any alleged violations and reach out and discuss that situation with the school division, offer technical assistance, and if the issue doesn't resolve to the parent's satisfaction, they certainly would have a right to file a systemic complaint that would be investigated through our Office of Dispute Resolution and Administrative Services. So we do provide oversight and guidance on these issues, but we cannot find a school division to be in non-compliance without giving them an opportunity to respond with all of the facts presented before them and to us, and for them to respond and the parents to provide any supporting documentation. But we would certainly take a look and discuss with the parent the issues and then review it with the local school division as appropriate. Question 11. Can parents be reimbursed for cost of transportation to an out-of-district private day placement if school divisions have staff shortage and the child is required to go door to door due to accommodation in the IEP? Transportation is a key element within the provision of a free, appropriate public education. So parents cannot be required, number one, to provide transportation for their child to receive their free, appropriate public education. And when you say out of districts, meaning they may have to cross county lines to go to a private school in another district's zone, that would account for that as well. If it's a IEP place student. Now, if the parent decides they want to privately place their child, then that's a different situation. But if a IEP team determines that a child must go to an out-of-district private day placement, then the district would be obligated to provide the transportation to that setting. Now, one of the options available to the school division would be to ask the parent if they would transport the child and offer them reimbursement for their travel expenses. Again, free appropriate public education means that the parent should not incur any cost for the child to receive a free appropriate public education. I think I answered that one pretty clearly. Next question, please. Had an eligibility meeting last week, and we have her IEP in place, and we'll have her IEP in place in the 30 days. Will there be in-person meetings for her? It goes back to the question of earlier that you can certainly request an in-person meeting, stressing the fact that a virtual meeting is not the way that you'll be able to meaningfully participate, and request that the school division hold the meeting in person or through an alternative means that you feel comfortable with. They can hold the meeting without you, of course, as long as they can demonstrate their inability to get you to participate. And that doesn't mean that you can't ask for the meeting and they don't, you want to go back and forth with yes or no. If you've requested the meeting, they need to address why they will not hold the meeting as you've requested and give you the prior written notice as to why. Because that's part of the free appropriate public education and your procedural safeguards. Next question. Here again, if the student has a visual impairment and should not be on a computer all day, what does that mean for virtual learning? Again, virtual learning does not have to be all virtual, meaning on a computer of some sort or some other technical device. There can be some other opportunities provided, such as a learning packet or some other activity. And this should be discussed with the child's IEP team as to how do we meet my child's visual impairment needs and the inability to stay on a computer all day. So again, this is an IEP team decision, and people need to address each child's needs individually. Next question. Will collaborative classes still be required to have aides? How would that work virtually? How do you envision virtual reading classes with 10 students and some of the students have dyslexia? How will accommodations be offered virtually? Again, each student is going to have individual needs and individualized accommodations that'll have to be discussed and determine how they're going to be implemented. A collaborative class virtually, I can see there being some difficulties, but that's not to say we can't make it happen. I mean, when you're doing a virtual learning, you got to figure out how we're going to be able to offer that individualized assistance. And again, that would be an IEP team decision on how do we provide that individualized assistance that a child needs in a collaborative environment. And that specific would attach to any kind of reading assignments or situations where you've got students that have varying accommodations and they're all going virtual. So each child's IEP team will need to discuss how those accommodations are going to be implemented and provided as they are written. Next question. What happens now for kids that were supposed to have 5 days of in-school therapies that will be moved down to 2 days? I'm not going to make an assumption here, but is this a situation where the child had 5 days and the parent has agreed to reduce the number to 2 days because we're doing it virtually? If that's the case, then the school division is free to lower the number of therapies. If the child is supposed to have 5 days in their IEP, then the IEP team needs to meet and talk about whether reduction is now appropriate, and if not, how do we provide for the 5 days of therapy in a virtual environment versus an in-school environment. And I mentioned, as I mentioned earlier, that you can use things like telehealth or some other virtual delivery of some of those related services and other therapies like OT, PT, and speech. Next question. This kind of goes back to the other question. Will there still be one-on-one assistance for children in subject areas they are struggling? If a child needs one-to-one assistance, and that's what the IEP team determines is appropriate, then the IEP team is going to have to figure out how they're going to provide the one-to-one in a virtual environment. And I'll say it again, that, and I think I saw a question pop up about that. If they're going virtually, can a school division still arrange to do one-to-one? There is nothing that prohibits a school division from being open majorly in a virtual environment, but also offering in-person instruction or a blended mix of virtual and in-person, if that's what's going to be required to meet the students' needs. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. Phase 3 of the reopening plan says that schools can open for in-person instruction, and if they do so, then they've got to meet the certain parameters within the CDC guidelines, the Virginia Department of Health. And they have to make those kind of determinations on a student-specific basis. They need to address the student's needs as appropriate to that child. Next question. Should I request an IEP meeting before school begins to add accommodations and present level of performance that manifested during the closure when instruction was virtual? The answer to that the short answer to that question is yes. You should request an IEP meeting anytime you believe you need to address your child's needs. Something's changed, and you certainly should be presenting any information that you as a parent were able to gather while the child received virtual instruction during the school closure period. You have more information and data available for the IEP team than the school would have as to how your child was responding to the virtual instruction. And we've actually addressed that in our frequently asked questions that'll be published within the next week, that school divisions should be encouraging the parents to provide the information that they have about their child during the virtual learning. Next question. Let me answer this question that just popped up. What's the point of doing all virtual and being able to offer in person? I'm not saying a school division has to. I'm saying that a school division has the option. They can go all virtual if they want, but then they also have to take into consideration, is virtual learning the most appropriate for every student? That has to be a consideration. Now, if they decided they're going to go all virtual, then they've got to make sure that their students with disabilities are going to be able to receive a free, appropriate public education within that virtual environment. I'm not saying that a school division is going to have to offer both, but they have the option to do so. There's nothing that's been put out that tells a school that they cannot have in-person instruction or can't do virtual and some in-person instruction for a group of students or for individual students. I hope that answered that person's question. Next question, please. Can there be some guidance sent to schools to enforce the in-person evaluations of students for eligibility? Many are still refusing to do in-person evaluations, thus delaying the eligibility decisions. I will mention to everyone again that we have done a new FAQ, and one of the questions in there is about the timelines. And as I mentioned earlier as well, none of the regulations have been modified, rescinded, or otherwise changed. They must still conduct the evaluation within the timelines, but you also have to understand that some evaluations cannot be done in a virtual environment due to potentially making them unreliable or invalid because they weren't conducted in accordance with the protocol of the maker of the evaluation. And in such cases, then the LEA and the parent should be discussing alternative type assessments that could be used to get to the same results that may not require an in-person and could be done through a virtual means. So the timelines are still there. It's just that they're difficult in meeting the timeline because of the type of assessments that may be needed. Again, an evaluation starts with a review of the record, and if they feel that the data is already available in the record, they can ask the parent if they feel a need for any additional evaluations, and if not, then they can continue to move towards re-eligibility. You obviously can't do that with an initial eligibility if there has not been any evaluations conducted prior. But certainly with a reevaluation and the eligibility determination, the use of information in the record is certainly an option. And again, school divisions are going to stay back up to 19, please. Actually, back up to 18 because I think we missed it. I'm going to finish my conversation about the evaluations. School divisions may not be saying that a student isn't eligible. They're just saying that they can't complete the evaluations. And that could be a true statement, as I mentioned, that if you can't conduct an evaluation in a virtual mode because of the type of an assessment, then that's their true answer. We cannot complete the evaluation. That doesn't mean they can waive the timeline, but as a parent, you may need to understand that there's a need to maybe agree to the extension of the timeline in order to be able to get the appropriate evaluation done. And I see Lorraine made a comment about no discussion about alternate assessments. Again, that's the option that's available, and that is clearly specified in our FAQ that school divisions should look at alternative assessments if they can't do an actual evaluation that they wanted to do. Is there something of an alternative mode that they can do to get the results they need to make a valid determination of eligibility or re-eligibility? All right, let's go back to 18. Is it possible for tutoring to be paid by the school through special education funds? If the IEP teens and the student needs tutoring as part of his free appropriate public education, then certainly that would be a service in the IEP and would be able to be covered through the special education funding mechanisms. All right, let's go back 19, 20, I think we're on 21. Nope, 20, we're on 20. My understanding is they are 100% responsible for the IEPs, but I fear that COVID amendments are going to be requested, thus not allowing these students fate. That first part of that statement is correct. The school division is responsible for ensuring that the IEPs that they have developed and presented and the parent has consented to are implemented with fidelity as they are written. And that's whether or not that student is going to be in virtual instruction, in-person instruction, in a public setting, or potentially in a private school setting. I'm not sure what a COVID amendment is, but if we're talking about amendments that talk about I'm not sure what they mean by a COVID amendment, but are going to be requested, thus not allowing the students to receive FAPE. The IEPs have to be implemented with fidelity as they are written for the environment that the child is going to be receiving instruction. I'll just leave it at that. 21. All right, my son with an IEP was supposed to start preschool this fall in the public school system. I don't think virtual learning is realistic for this age. Is there any discussion about letting preschool and or those with IEPs be taught in person? This would be small groups, the risk would be minimized. Again, I'll go back to my statement that there's nothing that prevents a school division from offering in person for those students they believe that's the most appropriate to provide a free, appropriate public education for a student with a disability. Next question. How can I get my daughter's services in her IEP at schools online? I think I've answered that a couple of times. IEP team decision is going to determine what your child's services are and in what environment they're going to receive them, you know, the frequency, duration, and location. And you can certainly request a placement out of district to a specialized private school. Again, an IEP team determination. Again, keeping in mind the private schools themselves are also operating on different schedules. They have schedules that vary from the LEAs that they may be taking students from. And I would, at this point, be a good point to caution that if your child is going to a private school, that you certainly should be making sure that the private school can implement your child's IEP as it's written, especially if they're also doing virtual or some alternate schedule of an A on and a B off, or day on, day off, or 2 days. Those are things that need to be discussed as well if you're considering asking for an out of the public school setting to a private setting as a way to get your child to in-person instruction that the private school that may be looking at or the school may be recommending may not themselves be offering a full complement of in-person instruction. Again, IEP teams drive the services and then drive the placement for a child. So if you're thinking of a private placement, the IEP team should be looking at what placement can actually implement the child's IEP. Question 23. If a student is withdrawn from public school to homeschool this year, will the student's IEP still be intact when the student re-enrolls in the public school next year? Or did they lose their IEP eligibility and will they need start over with a brand new eligibility process? IEPs do not expire. Eligibilities do not expire. What they become is probably inappropriate. And if you withdraw your child from a public school and go to homeschooling, you're going to waive all of the rights to a free, appropriate public education other than those that may be provided to the child through a service plan given the equitable services requirement.
I need to take a picture of something.
So the IEP stays intact. Certainly when you come back to re-enroll the student in a public school, the first thing the IEP team should do is review it to see if it's still appropriate for the child now that they're returning to the public setting. And it's the same thing with their eligibility. They would remain eligible, but if the eligibility lapses, then, in other words, the triennial date came up, then you would obviously be faced with doing a reevaluation of eligibility. But if you withdraw a student from the public school system, as a parent, you still have the right to ask the school division to do the reevaluation to review and revise the IEP as they would if their child was going to re-enroll, so that you can determine whether or not you want to return your child to the public setting. Nothing prohibits you from asking for those things to be done as well. Question 24. I was wondering if anybody was going to ask this question. What are makeup services or recovery services? I'm hearing these terms and don't understand what they are and when they would apply. Does the school need to provide these now? How is this different from compensatory services? All right. Compensatory services are generally provided when a school division fails to implement an IEP and therefore denies a student a free appropriate public education. That's where the term compensatory services come from. Ironically, the federal regulations don't really speak about compensatory services. They talk about making up for the failure to provide FAPE. The term compensatory services doesn't show up in the regulations directly. With the COVID situation at the department, we have discussed and have come up with what we're calling recovery services. And they are similar in nature to compensatory. And what we're advising school divisions to do, and the document has not yet been released, and we'll be addressing some of it in our FAQ, is they need to take a look at what needs to be provided for this child on an individual basis with regards to the services that were missed during the school closure time period. Now, this isn't ESY services. These are the equivalent of compensatory services. We've just coined the term recovery services to tie it back to the COVID. So you're hearing those terms. It's a very valid term, recovery services. And I suspect by next week that the recovery services document will be released and posted to our website. And once they do get posted, I plan to release them to my outlets to get them out and on the information portals for parents so they can see what they look like. And do they need to provide them now? The thing about recovery services, we're saying that you probably need to look and give the child an opportunity to demonstrate where he's fallen back and what does he really need, not to start off and determine, does he need recovery services from the beginning? So they don't have to provide them now, they could provide them later. But again, you as the parent are going to be part of that IEP team decision and be able to ask for an IEP meeting to talk about the provision of recovery or possibly even compensatory services because it was a denial of FAPE. And the recovery services were attaching to the fact that the school could not provide the services because of the school closure. It was out of their control somewhat. They're still going to provide the services, but it was out of their control, where compensatory services was a failure. I hope that clarifies the difference between the two. And I know I probably shouldn't be doing it, but I see a question popped up about how long can an IEP stay put? Let me clarify something with that question. First of all, stay put is a due process term. A hearing officer can put an IEP or anything else in a stay put situation pending the outcome of a hearing. When we talk about an IEP continuing, we're talking about a last agreed upon situation, and the last agreed upon IEP can remain in effect until duly changed and consented to by the parent. You can continue to make amendments to an IEP, but once that IEP starts to become difficult to implement or unclear on what's expected, then the wise thing would be to start a new IEP and go fresh with what's current for the services. But an IEP can stay in the last agreed upon situation I don't want to say forever, but when I first got to the department, I dealt with a case where an IEP had not been, a new IEP had not been consented to for over 10 years. They were doing amendments all the time. So it can happen, but not a good best practice. Hopefully that answered the question. There is no timeline on an IEP. Sorry, can't ask you any question. Question 25. How will my county make up the hours of in-person sped my son lost last year? That can be done through a couple of ways. I mentioned the recovery service, compensatory services, or potentially even through extended school year services. But again, making up time, that would be, if you're talking about making up missed hours, then that would probably be recovery services. But again, it would be an IEP team decision to talk about what's appropriate. Is it compensatory? Is it recovery? Both are going to look the same in their offering. It's just, it's a different terminology. So you do have the opportunity to ask your IEP team to take a look at where your child is now, based on where he was before COVID, and whether or not there should be some compensatory services because the IEP team failed to implement the IEP, or recovery services because it was due to their inability to provide the service given that the schools were closed. Question 26, which is, I don't know how much time we have, Lisa. We're at 8 o'clock.
Yeah, just a couple more minutes. Hank.
Are there any significant, because any question in the chat room to me would be significant. Is there a way that I can get the list of the questions that I didn't answer?
Yes, Hank, we're going to provide those to you. All the questions that are in the chat right now, we'll make sure we compile them for you and get them to you.
And if you provide me the complete list, all questions, I will take the time and make sure that each one gets some sort of a response that you can share with the group. It will take a little bit of time, being there's additional 200 some questions from what I saw popping up, but I will make the commitment that I and my team will compile a response to those questions and provide them back to you to share, and we'll do it in, you know, small batches. We won't wait until we get to all 200. We'll do maybe 10 and then 10 more and get them out to you until they're done. I'll make that commitment to everybody.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Hank. We appreciate you taking the time. I know that was.
Yeah, I am seeing a lot of questions I would really like an opportunity to address that I couldn't catch them as they were popping up, but I saw some very good and very necessary questions that need to be answered.
And Hank, we're leaving your phone numbers up and your email up, so in case anybody wants to take a picture of that, they'll have that information.
And for those that don't know me, that is my personal cell. You can call me at any time, day, night, during the weekends, on holidays. I may not answer you directly, but if you leave a message, I will make sure you get a phone call within 24 hours from either myself or one of my team members. I don't put my cell number on there just to be a nice guy. It's there for you all to use and to reach out so you can get assistance at a time that you need.
Hank, I'm
answer
so sorry to interrupt you. Thank you so much. You've been very helpful tonight. But I am a resource coordinator with an organization, it's nonprofit, that helps families that have children with special needs. And I too have a daughter that has special needs. And I just wanted to make sure it was okay to share your information on our website and to let our families be able to contact you with questions as we all navigate through this process. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's certainly okay to put me down as a resource, and you know, the department as a resource as a whole as well, but as a direct contact, they can reach out to me.
Okay. Thank you. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and thank you to all the parents that took the time out from your family to be here. That is a testimony to me that you truly are within your child's education, and that helps me continue to do what I do and love to do best. So I thank you all for taking that time.
Hank, thank you so much.
Pleasant
We
evening.
really appreciate the time you took tonight to talk to everybody. And
Not
again,
a problem.
Hank is true to his word. If you reach out to him, he will definitely get back to you. All right, and we just have this last slide of additional resources. We have the helpline email and phone number, and the Center for Family Involvement. We have people across the state, and we're available to help you with emotional support or system navigation or connect you to resources. So please feel free, if you have an ongoing situation or anything you want to connect with us with, to give us a call or to email us at the CFI helpline. And we also have the link up there for the Virginia Department of Education's website for their Recovery, Design, and Restart 2020 program. And hopefully you can find some information there as well. So Hank, thank you again so much. And unless anybody else has any comments, we're pretty much done for this evening, except for the IFSP Southwest Council will do some business right now. But we